Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and how are you doing today? I hope things are well and you are having a nice weekend. So, continuing with my discussion of some films in the Criterion collection, I want to take the opportunity today to talk about another corner of the Criterion collection that is made up of some films that are pretty famous and pretty well regarded in film critical circles because, among many things, because they are made by a singular voice in cinema, one that is quite unique, sometimes described as being perhaps iconoclastic, very philosophical, pondering many questions. And the filmmaker is Robert Bresson. Bresson he was a French filmmaker, and the films that he made, I think, have a striking style to them. The style is unmistakable, and it's very apparent from almost immediately. The films that you're going to watch are going to be quite different in tone and pace than, say, some of the more landmark, well-known films of, say, his contemporaries in the French New Wave, for example. That being said, the films from Bresson really pack an emotional punch, at least they potentially do, and they have a kind of harrowing, deep impact. Sometimes dark, sometimes light, but nevertheless quite impactful. So the films of Bresson are those that I really cherish and love and adore. I've had the great pleasure in my life and great fortune in my life of being able to have discovered in my own personal film journey. I discovered Bresson films when I was fairly young, and I was enthralled, I was stunned, I was quite shocked at this kind of filmmaking that was going on when he was making films in the late 50s, 60s, and the impact that it had on me was quite severe, in fact, and so I was never the same. I was forever altered in terms of a film-going person. So that's just generally my take on Bresson. He's incredibly important, and it's wonderful that the Criterion collection has a number of his films in physical media form. Not all, but it has a good selection. And so I would encourage you, if you are interested, to at least consider thinking about getting some Bresson films, such as the ones that I am about to show you right now. So the first one I want to bring to your attention is Spine 183, and this is a DVD, Les Dames du Bois de Boulogne. This is not a Blu-ray, but this is a DVD, so if that is in any way significant to you in terms of your own spending of money, purchasing DVDs or purchasing Blu-rays, that sort of thing, please note that this is an earlier DVD, and so it's not necessarily the most up-to-date release, shall we say. Nevertheless, the film itself is a remarkable early example of a Bresson film. This is from 1945. It is only about an hour and a half or so. It's not very long, so it goes by very quickly, and it's a kind of romantic melodrama of sorts, but there is so much more going on here. And so, as I said, this is an early Bresson work, and so you aren't necessarily getting the style of the Bresson films that he'll become famous for later on in his career in the 50s. Nevertheless, you are still getting something that is, in substance anyway, undoubtedly a Bresson film in terms of the way in which characters interact with each other, the way is there hope for in very grandiose terms, this idea of is there hope for humanity, or are we destined to want to hurt each other and to deceive each other? What is the nature of deception, and how do we react to it as human beings when we are confronted by it? Very general terms, that's what is going on here. And I think we can get a sense of this kind of exploration occurring throughout the entirety of Bresson's work, at the very least in the context of the Bresson films that appear in the Criterion collection. So this is this is no exception to that. And with that, it's a great example of early Bresson, but it's an early Bresson film that seems to have its subject matter firmly rooted in the world of Bresson, if you know what I mean. And what is more, as a film itself, as a kind of romantic melodrama, it is quite involving, and it when I say involving, I mean it involves you. It really pulls you in, and it is quite enchanting, captivating, and it is clever in many parts. So as a film itself, it works. As a Bresson film, it is an early Bresson film that still has links to the Bresson films to come. So let me put it that way. So you're getting, in my view anyway, a really complete film that is also, it happens to be an early Bresson film. So it is only DVD, but if that is okay with you, then it is very easy for me to recommend for your consideration, 183. Next is Spine number 222 from 1950. This is Diary of a Country Priest. Now, this is a DVD, and unfortunately, my friends, as of the time of this video, this Criterion DVD is out of print. This is out of print, so it is not possible at the moment to get it through the Barnes & Noble sale or through Amazon or through the Criterion store directly, etc., which is a shame, because this is a kind of landmark film in many respects in terms of Bresson. We get perhaps for the first definitive time a real statement of the so-called Bresson style, in terms of what many people have seen as being minimalist in its approach to actors, in terms of presenting information, the idea of the importance of the written word versus action, and also the idea of how characters are interacting with each other in the context of acting styles. There is a certain kind of acting style on display here, because of the types of actors that Bresson seeks to engage in the context of his films, of course. So that's just the style part, which is, I think, very rich and filled with a lot of possibilities. Right? The substance is quite profound in the sense that we are dealing with crisis of faith, or crises of faith, if you will, in the context of religious faith. And that is played out in human relationships within the setting of a sort of small town. But we have human relationships that either try to help to heal that crisis of faith, or further exacerbate that crisis of faith. So the the interplay of human intrigue, if you will, the day-to-day drama that lead to quite dire consequences, is a stunning sort of indictment, if you will, of many general aspects of humanity, universally speaking, of course. And so but at the same time, there is a driving sense of yearning, of trying to be optimistic, perhaps, at the very heart of this film. And that might lead some people to think that there is something of trying to attain a sense of spirituality through the medium of cinema, which, if that is the case, then it is truly remarkable. So that is Diary of a Country Priest, and in a very, very brief nutshell. As I say, unfortunately, the Criterion DVD, which I have here, is out of print, and that is such a shame. It would be so wonderful if one day Criterion were able to find the ability to get this back. It is a remarkable work, and of course, if you can find it through other labels, I would strongly recommend it, because it is, as I say, as a film, it is a towering achievement. So this is Diary of a Country Priest. Next is Spine number 650. This is from 1956, and this is the film A Man Escaped. So the French title of A Man Escaped is Un condamné à mort s'est échappé. So literally, I think that is translated as a man condemned to death escaped. So a man escaped. So essentially that means that is referring to a prisoner condemned to death, escaped. So that's the title of the film, A Man Escaped. This is yet another example of the prime example of the power of the Bressonian style, which is on display in this film with full force and just relentless in terms of how it is executed. This film is an example of style and substance really interlocking. Not to say that his other films aren't, of course, but this is an example of style and substance really interlocking to create things that I think are just truly remarkable about cinema, namely this feeling of unease, suspense. It is, if anything, it is not only a film that contemplates the nature of the inability or ability to trust another. There are not only questions of existential consequence. There are not only questions about life and death, the ultimate questions there, but it is, I think, in many respects, a real powerful, almost action film in a way. It is a suspense film par excellence, and the suspense that is generated by seemingly simplistic editing techniques and again, minimalistic, stylistic concerns is truly it's a sight to behold, and it is a very engaging film from the word go. So this is A Man Escaped, one of the most tense and most thrilling films in all of Bresson's works, certainly in the Bresson films that appear in the Criterion collection. So this is a film that I think is very much one that is perhaps one of the Bresson films that could be that I could recommend to someone who is new to Bresson for the first time, in terms of it being a kind of a kind of action. Not, I mean, I don't want to say action. I don't want to emphasize the idea of action. It's not. It doesn't have a lot of action set pieces per se. But I mean that in the context of a Bresson film, in that there are certain setups that indicate a certain type of action, if you will. It's not a sort of conventional action film, but it is a strong suspense film with a lot of depth. So by that, I would strongly suggest this to anyone who is new to Bresson and is looking for some entry point into the world of Bresson. And also it is a truly remarkable and fantastic film. This is A Man Escaped. Next is 1959, spine number 314, Pickpocket. Now, I've spoken about this film maybe once or twice in previous videos in the past, some time back. I really love this film. I really, really love this film. I think I've seen this film more times than I can count. This is the first Bresson film I ever saw way back on VHS, and it was a marvel. It was a real marvel, and I think upon seeing the film, I can say that my cinematic viewing life changed. There is a kind of rhythm that is on display here in terms of the Bresson style, the minimalist style, his use of actors that don't necessarily display a kind of professional acting technique necessarily. Everything seems to be presented or conveyed in a rather dry fashion. There is a stiffness in the way in which the dialogue is being presented and being spoken. There is a kind of rigidity in the way in which characters move, walk from one end to the other. But there is something quite, it's almost difficult to describe, but there is a kind of driving force underneath this surface. There is an undeniable charm that is almost imposed, if you will, on the characters as we see them. It's almost like there's something that's coming not from the cinema itself, but it seems to be encouraging something from within here to look at the screen or look at the Blu-ray and see the characters as they interact. And I therefore am almost interacting with the work itself, and things are happening on screen that I bring something to that makes the film more alive to me. And it's almost like there's a dialogue between me and the film. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well, but that's a kind of approach that I have to this work. And it's just one way for me to try to explain the way in which I think this film, which on the surface is very stylistically, in many ways, even in terms of its minimalistic approach, I think it goes in a very stark way, quite strikingly so. But it still achieves an almost counterpoint, if you will, in terms of its emotional impact, which is really amazing. It's really amazing if you think about it, and it's a kind of great achievement in Bresson's filmography. So Pickpocket is, I think, it could be one of, if not my favorite Bresson film, but it is one that is truly near and dear to my own heart. And so I strongly recommend this film if you haven't seen it already. This is 314, Spine 314 in the Criterion Collection, Pickpocket. And then we come to Spine 297, Balthazar. This is from 1966. And we have yet a further exploration or development of the Bresson style here, and it's taken to a very unique place, quite a shocking place. It's taken to, now we have the minimalist style of Bresson that we've seen so far applied to his actors that we see in this film, of course, but it's also applied to animals as well. One particular animal in this film, who is almost the star of the film in a very memorable role. So this film is one of those works that is one of the most emotionally heart-wrenching films I have ever seen. It's quite amazing too, again, when I think about the actors and the story and the main character, this animal, and how the film really applies a deep emotional richness to each of the characters. And again, it seems to be acting in a way that compels me to want to interact with the film as I'm watching it. And this leads to conclusions that are, I don't want to say too much, but the conclusions that are reached in this film, I think, are quite memorable, and they are unforgettable, and they lead to an emotional experience that is almost transcendental in terms of the way in which it really has the potential of impacting one's heart and soul, if you will. This film is one of the great films of Bresson. He has great films already, but this is one of the greats. And so it is a film that I think should be seen by as many people as possible. It is one that I think if you see it, you will never forget it, and you will keep talking about it, and I'm sure that it will be one that you will watch or want to watch again and again, because it is really that astounding and memorable. The power of this film in its ability to affect the viewer is undeniable, and it is therefore one of those supreme examples of Bresson. It is one of those supreme examples of the power of cinema, if you want to put it that way. This is Balthazar. This is spine number 297, the Blu-ray. Next is spine number 363 from 1967, Machette. This film is presented by the Criterion Collection in a DVD. This is not a Blu-ray, and so for those of you who are, let's say, Blu-ray only, that might be something to keep in mind. This is, at the moment, it's only on DVD. So, but for those who are okay with DVD, then this is certainly one to consider, because we are reaching a point in Bresson's career, his professional career as a filmmaker, where he's creating films that do not flinch. They don't seek to, not that his earlier films did, of course, but here in Machette, he is painting a world that is quite stark, maybe bleak, but nevertheless so engaging, so emotionally resonant, and it causes shockwaves and vibrations in one's heart when one watches it, in a way that only, I think, truly great films can. And once again, we have the application, if you will, of the Bresson style, which is in many ways apropos here. It is ideally suited to the subject matter, because we are dealing with a Bresson style that might be seen as being very calculated and planned, stylistically designed to do so. Again, minimalist in terms of the way characters move and occupy the cinematic space. But the results of that are the expressions of a story that is a troubling, it's a troubling and disturbing work, and it is bleak and quite harrowing, to the extent that the kinds of emotional punches and the kinds of emotional impacts that this film has are just undeniably powerful and very deep. It's a film that is not in any way flashy, but it is a film that has a kind of quiet power that creeps up on you. And then once it has captured you, it never lets go. And then after the film ends, the power just stays with you for just weeks and weeks and weeks on end. It is just one of those things that you cannot get out of your head after you've seen this film. It is a remarkable film. It is one of the greats. It is tough, but it is really, really great. So this is one that I would strongly recommend if you haven't seen it already. Last, but certainly not least, 886. This is the Blu-ray of the film L'Argent. This happens to be Bresson's last film. This is from 1983. So if you recall, we had Machette from 1967, and then now we have his last film, L'Argent, 1983. So there is a bit of a gap there. And so we don't have, at the moment anyway, any of his other films, Bresson's films, during this period. So the last film we have is L'Argent. And I say that because he made a number of other films that aren't currently in the Criterion Collection physical media collection. Who knows, maybe one day, fingers crossed, we might see more. But be that as it may, at least for now, we do have his last film. This is a color film. This is a film in the early 80s. So in many respects, it might be seen as being very distinctly different from his earlier works that we saw from the 1940s and 50s up to the mid-1960s. Then we come to the early 80s with L'Argent. But if you see this film, I think it is apparent immediately that the visual sensibilities are Bressonian to the max. And the subject matter that is on display here, the story, the narrative, is also very Bressonian to the max. And it is a kind of has a bleak tone. There is a certain sense of randomness. There is an opening up of perhaps of the world in a way that we might not necessarily have seen in other Bressonian films before, which is perhaps an interesting way in which one might begin to try to reconcile later Bresson films with earlier Bresson films. At the same time, there are strong linkages with the past in his works. As a film itself, it is a quietly devastating work that is, again, like so many other Bresson films, it is impossible to forget. You can never shake the film from your mind after the film is over. And it has a kind of quiet, deadly precision, almost, that is a wonderful example of the kind of insights and interests that Bresson had up to the very end. So this is the film L'Argent, the world has become quite a cold place indeed, but oh gosh, it is such a remarkable thing to behold. So my friends, that's it for now. And so if you are interested in some of those films, then I would strongly recommend that you at least consider getting one or more of those titles. I know that you will not be disappointed because, as I say, Robert Bresson is one of those key filmmakers, and it's great to have some of his films, some of his great famous masterpieces in the Criterion collection. Okay, my friends, that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, cheers.